The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Saturday night. Hope everybody is having a great start to their weekend. Yeah, it's let me get these headphones off. All right, today we will be talking about more stuff on wokeism, wokeness. I don't know what you call it. Woke is anyway, being woke, and the influence it has on business and why it has an influence of business. I think it's important to know why it has an influence of business and who gives it the influence of business, who makes it possible for them to have this kind of influence. And we'll talk about a counter movement, a movement out of Silicon Valley opposing wokeness in the Valley, opposing wokeness in business more generally. Really interesting stuff. Let me just see. I've lost my one article. Where is it? Disappeared on me. There it is. All right. They call the mission's called Mission Protocol. Mission Protocol. You can look it up. So some good news. Some good news on the woke front. Anyway, as usual, you can ask questions. Super chat is open. As usual, I encourage you to like the show before you leave, so you don't forget. And of course, if you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing. Click on the bell. Do all the do all those things. That way, you'll know when I go live, and you'll get notifications for new shows and all of that. So please. Yeah, I know I need some absorbing sound material in the studio. We'll get that. Bookcases are going to go up. Books are going to arrive. A week from Monday, books will arrive. 100,000. I think about 76 book boxes. They're not all filled with books, but a significant number of them are filled with books arriving from when I packed them up in California. So that'll arrive. So that'll go in the back there. All of that will be bookcases with books. Then once we do that, then we'll be able to have a better assessment of the acoustics of the room, and we can put in some other acoustic features to get the sound balanced. But all in good time, one step at a time. All right. I think we've solved the problem of the clipping at least. But yes, there is a little bit of a room noise. It is what it is. Let's see. Yes, so you can use the super chat to ask questions. That is what I respond to. I can't keep track of the chat. Sometimes I respond to stuff going on in the chat, like I just did about the room noise, but typically I don't. So if you want me to see your question, respond to your question, please use the super chat feature, and I will do that. Typically, we try to raise $400 at a show. I don't see Alejandrina here, so maybe one of you can step in and help us out, because without Alejandrina, it's much more difficult. Ryan is still contributing for the balcony show. Balcony show supported. Thanks. I need to have access to my balcony. There's still a ton of work before we can get to have a balcony show. We will have a balcony show, but it's going to involve finishing the renovations in the condo. And God, is that going, it's so difficult. It's so hard. It's so hard to get a good job done and to get it decently supported. So yeah, keep supporting the Balcony Show. And we will have it, but we'll have it probably in a couple of months. Once I come back from my travels and everything here is done, then I'll do the Balcony Show and show you the view from the balcony. I think you'll enjoy that. All right. Let's see. Anything else? I was just looking at the news. Just as a side note, it's interesting to note that the Iranians had an election. You know, they have elections. They pretend that that they elect their leaders, and they do to some extent. They get to elect between a whole set of Islamists. If you're not an Islamist, you can't run, but you get more moderate Islamists to the most extreme nutty Islamists, and they have a range, and you get to choose which flavor Islamists you want. And even though in Iran, I think you're required to vote by law, they had very, very little turnout. So most Iranians go, what's the difference? What's the point of voting? The supreme leader is not elected, so the supreme leader is there no matter what. And then electing a president between all these variety of Islamists, that's meaningless. So they had very low turnout. But of the people who turned out, they chose the nutty extremist Islamists. So it's going to be interesting. They chose the guy who runs the judicial section of so really a by the book, pretty out there Islamist. So Iran is definitely moving in the wrong direction. But of course, without a revolution there, without the people actually rejecting their government completely and turning it over, nothing's going to change. It's certainly not going to change through an election. So kind of sad for the Iranian people, and probably more difficult now in the sense of more difficult now for Americans in the sense of the Iranians will be more aggressive, more difficult, more likely to be offensive, more likely to go after Americans, unlikely that an American regime will do anything about it. So yeah, not a good day in the Middle East, not a good day for the U.S., not a good day for Israel. All right. Let us see. All right. I'll just take this question quickly. Although, if you want me to take the question quick, then you have to put more dollars into it. We had a disagreement a while back about gun rights. You felt we didn't need AR-15s. I don't remember saying that exactly, but now the military is going woke opinion. I don't see the connection between the two. I'm sorry. I don't see how you having a AR-15, whether it's right or wrong for you to have an AR-15, separate question, but I don't see how you having an AR-15 prevents the military from going woke. And I don't think the military is going to go woke in a sense that they'll do all the seminars, the woke seminars, and the leadership will be woke. The leadership's been woke for decades. I mean, Petraeus was a woke general. I mean, he had these rules of engagement that crippled Americans at the expense of Iraqis. I don't know what's more woke than that. So you've got generals, but the military, the people in the military are not going to be woke. But what difference does it make if you have an AR-15? You're going to launch a revolution? Well, if you launch a revolution, as I've said over and over again, when you launch a revolution, we're not going to count on your AR-15. We're going to go in and we're going to steal guns from the military arsenals, and we're going to steal tanks if we can, and we're going to get our hands on the biggest guns we can, if the goal is a revolution. But the purpose of having guns at home is not a revolution. The purpose of having guns at home is self-defense. And you could argue that there's certain neighborhoods and certain parts of the country in which having an AR-15 is necessary for self-defense, and then I'd support it. There are other parts where the police are very close and well-equipped where it's probably unnecessary. So you're not going to use an AR-15 to defend yourself against the military. When they come for you, your AR-15 is not going to be much help. So, yeah, I'm not, we could argue what level weapon you need in order to defend yourself. And that's fine. That's a legitimate argument. I mean, as long as we agree that at some point there are weapons that are not acceptable for self-defense, a tank, a bazooka, an anti-aircraft missile. As long as we agree that those are not acceptable, then we can argue about the AR-15. And I think that probably those kind of decisions should be made locally, depending on the circumstances locally. As I said, in some circumstances, it makes sense that you need an AR-15 to defend yourself. In others, it might not. I know AR-15s pretty well. AR-15 was my weapon in the military. I used it a lot. I'm very familiar with it. It's a good weapon. Not my favorite, not my choice if I had to go into battle, but it's a good weapon. I would take an AK-47 any day over the AR-15 if you actually want to go into battle. All right. I'm not stating what you can or cannot have. It's the rule of law is stating in the United States, and would state even in a completely rational, objective society, what you can or cannot have. That's who states it, not me. As Ayn Rand said, the issue of gun rights is a complex issue, and you'd have to think it through and figure out exactly how it applies to different people. But when it comes to weapons, the government, the whole point of having a government is that it is an institution that has a monopoly over the use of force. And as part of its monopoly over the use of force, it gets to regulate at least some offensive weapons. And that's how it works. Yeah, you should, if you think the Viet Cong won because of their sidearms, if you think the Afghans won because of what do you call it, AR-15s, then you guys don't know history, and you should go and listen to a proper history of war and what made it possible for what makes it possible for these people to win. But that's for a different show, and I'm gonna. Guns are weapons. Guns are weapons. The only purpose of a gun is to kill. That's the only purpose a gun exists. And it is a weapon, and it is by law in any rational society would be regulated. Maybe not your handgun, but certainly big guns would be regulated. All right. Yeah, history is not most people's strong suit. Because nobody teaches you history, and often the history books that you read are complete garbage and written by Marxists or written by leftists or written by right-wing people, all with an agenda to get certain things. All right. As I said, you have a right to defend yourself, and you have a right to have the weapons necessary for your self-defense. That you certainly have a right. But what does that constitute is something that a legislature is responsible for determining what does self-defense constitute. That's why we have a government. I don't believe in anarchy, as you know. All right, let's see. What are we doing? Rights exist, but the state's responsibility is to regulate those rights. So, for example, even your property rights, what constitutes property? What constitutes the borderline? How do we define it? You have to register your property. All of that, in a sense, is a form of helping define and ultimately protect property rights, but somebody has to define them. Property rights, particularly in the internet, with patents, with everything else, is not simple or obvious, and you need a legislature to be engaged in defining and creating objective definitions of what constitutes your property, and that applies to the right to self-defense as well. Every one of those rights has to be clearly articulated, clearly defined, boundaries set so that we know what they are. Right? And that's the role in a free society of the legislature. All right. So, I don't think I need to tell you guys that the woke corporations, woke business is dramatically on the rise, seems to be dramatically on the rise. You got businesses that are folding left and right to wokeness. You've got groups of employees within, we hear a lot about tech, but I think it's all over. Groups of employees rallying around causes and demanding that corporate management rally around those causes as well. There's one example of this that was bizarre, really. During the recent fighting between Hamas and Israel, there was a group of employees at Apple. Now, it turned out to be, it was like 1,000 employees out of Apple, I think, employs 400,000 in the United States or something like that. Wrote to Tim Cook insisting that he publicize his opinion about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, of course, siding with the Palestinians. Luckily, Tim Cook ignored that and did not make an official Apple declaration about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Explain to me, what issue is there, right? What issue is there relating to Apple's business in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? What relevance does Israeli-Palestinian conflict have for Apple's business? Why should Apple business leadership be engaged and involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And yet, they demanded it, right? They object to certain hires at Apple. More recently, this same group has objected to the idea of going back to the office, right? They are demanding that they have a right to work from home. And how dare Apple demand that they come back to the office? These are people who took a job at Apple knowing they would have to go back, knowing they would work in an office, because Apple has never had a flexible work environment. They've never had a condition by which it was optional. You went to the office to work. During COVID, people worked from home. Now Apple is requiring them to go back to the office, and these people are just flipping out, right? They flipping out over the idea that they would have to go to the office, and it's all about their feelings. They don't, they feel like they're doing better. Here's part of the statement, and I quote: "Over the last year, we have often felt not just unheard, but at times actively ignored. Messages like, 'We know how many of you are eager to reconnect in person with your colleagues back in the office,' with no messaging acknowledging that there are directly contradictory feelings among us, feel dismissive and invalidating. It feels like there is a concerted a disconnect between how the executive team thinks about remote location flexible work and the lived experience of many Apple employees. So their feelings are not being taken into account. Their emotions are not being cultivated. And even though there might be a small minority among Apple employees, how dare Apple say that we know that many of you, they said many of you, not even all of you, not most of you, just many of you. How dare they say that? and not take into account the feelings, the emotions of those souls who do not want to go back into the office, who do not miss their colleagues, who do not want to reconnect in person. How dare they? I mean, this is, I think what typifies kind of woke culture is the appeal to emotion, right? It's completely emotion-driven. It's not argument-based. It's not fact-based. It's not reason-based. Right? It's completely emotional. And it's to try to manipulate people based on those emotions. Manipulate people into acting in order to please and reduce eliminate this, or prevent the snowflakes from melting. Right. It's not a, let me just, I see there's some, yep. All right, so here we have these crazy employees demanding these things. They demand it for Apple, they demand it from Google, they're all over the place demanding stuff. All kind of a emotion-based cultural authoritarianism. We demand, this is what has to happen because we feel that that's what has to happen. And the question is, I think, among many in Silicon Valley is, how do you manage these people? How do you manage in-house a team of cultural authoritarians? Now, note that particularly in California, it's very difficult to fire people. It's very difficult to get rid of people. So the only solution is not to hire them in the first place. Okay. And it'll be interesting to see if in interviews, companies start trying to tease out the extent to which you're going to be a headache from a woke perspective. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. All right. So one of the manifestations of wokeism recently was the election of 3 board members to Exxon. Board members that are advocates, big advocates of climate change, big opponents of fossil fuels, big supporters of the idea that fossil fuels that oil companies should be focusing their energy on alternative energies, alternative, or what does Alex Epstein call them? Unreliables. Should be focusing on unreliables. Should be focusing on wind, should be focusing on solar, undermining everything that is Exxon, everything that Exxon means. And it's interesting. So recently 3 board members were elected onto Exxon board. 3 members. It's a board of 12. They will constitute 25% of the board. They were elected by shareholders to the board of Exxon to represent the viewpoint that Exxon should be shifting away from fossil fuels towards unreliables. How does this happen? How does this happen? How do shareholders actually vote for this? So the hedge fund that led the charge for this is a new hedge fund called Engine Number One that is focused on climate change. It is focused on trying to have an impact on corporations towards doing this. But Engine Number One had less than 1% of Exxon stock. So how did they manage to get a slate of 3 board members to be elected to a, probably the leading oil company in the world today? Well, only because big institutional investors that you might have your money with, your 401k with, your savings with. BlackRock, the largest institutional investor, the largest manager of 401k plans, ETFs, mutual funds, Vanguard, Fidelity. These are big shareholders. BlackRock has gone completely woke, if you will, right? BlackRock has decided that it's no longer right for corporations to maximize shareholder wealth. That now businesses should take into account all stakeholders, including climate change. Now, BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager, and it's Exxon's second largest shareholder. And Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock, is a committed to, changing corporate America. So this isn't some low-level employees. This is the CEO of the largest asset manager in the world, committed to using his influence in companies that he owns shares in to change them. Now, he doesn't own the shares. You guys do. But for example, if I had a 401k with BlackRock, I would take my money out. Because if he's not going to manage the investments to maximize my wealth, to maximize my return on investment, if he's going to maximize the investments on some social agenda that he has, who the hell is he? He didn't take my money with a promise, invest with BlackRock, invest in our mutual funds, invest in our 401ks, and we will change the world and make it more socialist or fascist. That's not BlackRock's marketing slogan. They have a fiduciary duty, a legal responsibility to maximize the returns, to maximize profits for investors, for shareholders. He can use his wealth, his personal wealth, any way he pleases. He can go out there and do what he wants with his money. But with my money, he has a fiduciary responsibility. So first, I think some investors in BlackRock 401ks should sue BlackRock. Right. And then people should withdraw their funds from BlackRock. And it's stunning to me that there's almost no response. There's almost no engagement. There's the culture's just rolled over. Okay, if BlackRock wants to take our money and use it in this way, it's truly stunning. Now, I don't know that an organization like BlackRock would be this large, would be this extensive, if not for the tax code, if not for the fact that we have 401ks, if not for the fact that our savings are skewed in a particular way. It truly is horrific. So why did Exxon do it? Because investors like BlackRock voted to put on the board of Exxon directors that are going to go against the interest of other shareholders of Exxon. Now, again, I think BlackRock should be sued for doing that. I wish somebody would do that. Part of this goes back to the fact that today, it used to be, 50 years ago, Milton Friedman wrote an essay that the only responsibility of business is to make money. The only social responsibility, I don't believe business has a social responsibility, but the only social responsibility, he said, of a business is to make money. And for a long time, that was the view I'd say, economists and finance people and markets and investors. And that has dramatically changed over the last couple of years. And over the last couple of years, this idea of stakeholder capitalism, and you saw my debate with John Mackey, the idea that no, business should take care of its not just of its customers to make a profit, but of its customers in and of themselves. It should take care of their employees and their suppliers. It should take care of, it should think about what's good for society and what's good for, I guess, the environment and what's good for the world. And shareholders are just one among many stakeholders. And this attitude of the importance of stakeholders and the diminishment of shareholders, this attitude that corporations are vehicles for social engineering, are vehicles to be manipulated in order to achieve social goals. This attitude that is now prevalent. A year ago, or 2 years ago, because it was before COVID, 2 years ago, the Business Roundtable declared that they would no longer, the Business Roundtable, this is the lobbying group of the largest businesses in the United States, that they no longer conceive of the corporation as primarily focused on maximizing shareholder wealth, that their primary obligation was to stakeholders. So business in America has completely capitulated, completely given in, completely given up on the idea of maximizing shareholder wealth. And as a consequence, it has bought into the idea that it has, quote, social responsibility, that it needs to appease its various stakeholders, including the community, including minorities, including the planet, including spotted owls, including whatever. And that has opened it up to every pressure group, every group of employees that have some agenda item now demanding that the corporation do it. And the corporation can't say, no, we don't do that. We're just doing profits. We're just making money. We're just maximizing shareholder wealth. That has opened it up. That is what has made possible that every pressure group now is demanding concessions, demanding social involvement, social intervention from the various corporate leaders. All right, let me address an issue that's coming up in the chat that needs to be addressed. Wokeism is not Marxism. I've said this 1,000 times. The modern left is not Marxist. Marxism is too nice of a term to use for them. They're far worse than Marxists. Marxism is an entire system of ideas. It's a false, evil system of ideas. But it is an entire system of ideas that categorizes people based on certain views. It has a certain view of history and the deterministic view of history. It has a certain view of capitalism. It has a certain view of how history unfolds into the future and what comes next. These woke characters, the modern left, the far left, are not Marxists. The nihilists. They don't have a vision. They don't have a theory. Critical race theory is not Marxism just applied to race. It's much worse than Marxism. Yes, I know you can call it neo-Marxism, but it's not neo-Marxism. It's postmodernism. It's postmodernism which goes beyond. It dumps Marx because Marx is too rigid. Marx is too, quote, scientific. And they dump. There's no science. There's no truth. There's no reality. While Marx implies that, that's not Marxism. They're nihilists. They're complete, utter subjectivists. They're emotionalists. I've been talking about this for years. So those of you argue that I'm coming late to the party is absurd. They're absolutely obsessed with equity, which means, that's right, which means equality to them, which means the destruction of all that is good, all that is better, all that is superior. It's not the superiority of the proletarian. It's not the achievement of some a proletarian utopia. They have no conception of that. It's hatred of the good for being the good, chopping them down, destroying them, putting them down. Hatred of life, hatred of values, hatred of success. And it's motivated by emotion and feeling. And mostly by fear and alienation. So it's giving them way too much credibility to call them neo-Marxists. They don't know Marx. They have no clue what Marx is. They have no clue about class struggle. They have no clue about anything that Marx was involved in. Neo-Marxists gives them a semblance of credibility. They don't deserve it. They're much worse. They're much lower in the rungs of hell. And by the way, I've been talking about the nihilist left for years and years and years. And suddenly talking about this round of nihilist left since, obviously with Black Lives Matter last year, nonstop. So give me a break. Now, it's true. It's not the only topic I talk about. I also talk about the nihilist right. But because I don't believe there's only one enemy. I don't believe there's only one thing. There is such a thing as a neo-Marxist. These people are not neo-Marxists. You want a neo-Marxist? It's, oh God, what's the professor at Harvard, the black professor at Harvard? Cornel West is a neo-Marxist. These people are not neo-Marxists. And Cornel West is not CRT. Cornel West is not a nihilist. I mean, he's a form of nihilist. Richard Wolff is a neo-Marxist. Right? So it doesn't help when you use categories you don't understand, you apply them to the bad guys, and you are discredited because you immediately, people can see you don't know what you're talking about. So get your categories right. All right. What did I want to... So the success of these woke creatures, and woke is just shortcut for the emotionalist, demanding, whiny, complaining, attitude that these people have. They can't be offended. The anti-free speech, that's the big issue. And by the way, I've been talking about free speech since I started this podcast, because I started this whole show on the day that Charlie Hebdo was attacked, and free speech has been a constant theme. And what these people are against more than anything else is free speech, because they can't take it that speech is offensive. Yeah, I keep having to repeat myself. Iran, Juan, Bernie, a nihilist, Kendi and D'Angelo, religionist. Woke racism is a religion like Marxism. It's M2 Aladim. As I've explained 1,000 times, you can't make intersectionality into an M2. It just cannot work because it's too fragmented. The whole point of critical race theory, the whole point of their religion, the whole point of intersectionality is disintegration. The whole point is everybody's against everybody. You cannot unify anybody around white, what do you call it? White, not guilt, whatever the D'Angelo stupid thing is, which I did a whole video on last year, right? You can't integrate that. You can't unify people around it. It's a disunifier. It's a disintegrator. It's a D2 disguised as an M2, but it's a D2. It's completely broken up. And indeed, anything that comes out of postmodernism, even if they couch it as, yeah, follow me, we'll all do whatever. White fragility, thank you. Anything that comes out of postmodernism is inherently D2, because postmodernism is inherently denying the existence of reality, denies the existence of truth, any truth, and therefore completely disintegrated. So going to Leonard Peikoff's dim, I think, I'm not certainly not speaking for Leonard, but I think that all of these, and by the way, Leonard talks about egalitarians as being D2s, the worst kind of D2s possible. And that's exactly what these people are. God. All right. So it's... All right, I'm going to ignore the chat because it's just frustrating and just not true. So no, Juan and Bernie are power-lusting politicians who, yes, they're basically nihilists, they're driven by hate. Certainly, both of those are. Kendi and D'Angelo are much more sophisticated, but much more dangerous, much more impactful, but they are nihilists. They are egalitarians. They are complete. The whole ideology, their whole ideology is built on disintegration. M needs to integrate and needs to appeal to a broad number of people to gain influence. It has to, this is why Christianity is so powerful, right? More powerful than Judaism. Because Christianity is universal. It's a universal religion. You can all join. But if you think that an ideology that says all white people should feel guilty and are nothing and should be nobodies, and that is not an M. Particularly in a society where, there are more white people than anybody else. That's not unifying. That's not integrating. That's setting everybody against everybody else, which is exactly their goal. Their goal is not to create a society. Their goal is not a utopia. Their goal is not some beautiful society in the future. Their goal is destruction. Their goal is pain. Their goal is to make you feel guilty. Their goal is to make you suffer. It has nothing to do with creating something. There's nothing for them to create. Every single company is not unified on the topic of white fragility. Nobody takes white fragility seriously. Yes, the company does the virtue signaling it needs to do to show that it's okay. But it's not unified. 90% of the employees are making fun of CRT in the background. Nobody believes it. Nobody believes in it. It's a complete facade. It's a way to score points. I mean, even in Silicon Valley, I will give you examples. People are rejecting this nonsense, left and right. And a majority of Apple employees don't participate in these woke groups that send out their demands to the CEO. It's a tiny fraction of the employees. You cannot unify people, truly unify people, and drive them towards a goal of disintegration. It has to be around some ideal. What's the ideal of white fragility? There is no ideal. There is no vision. There's no thing that we're fighting for. Other than you're rotten. And the world's rotten. And there's nothing really to do because you're determined to be rotten. It's just a bunch of social signaling. Virtue signaling. Trying to appear cool. Of course, you don't have to be a majority to take things over. But you have to have an ideology that unifies. God, you guys take things out of context. Of course, you don't have to be a majority. The communists weren't a majority. The Christians weren't a majority. The Nazis weren't a majority. The Nazis won. They didn't win a majority in the elections of 1932. 32, was it? I think it was 32. But you have to have an ideology that rallies the majority around you ultimately. Otherwise, you can't establish control. Now, for the long run, look, in the short run, yes, there's no question. The Pol Pot was a nihilist and egalitarian, and he wasn't an M2, he was a D2. And for a while, he controlled Cambodia and utterly devastated it and slaughtered millions of people. But it wasn't a sustainable ideology. It wasn't something that could survive. Every company is first of all, that's just not true. And I talked about HR departments and what they do, but that's not unification. You don't understand what unification means if you think in those terms. Sorry. Again, you cannot have an ideology that breaks all people into little groups and has them all fighting against each other and all in conflict with one another. Not a big group and a minority group and we oppress the minority. That's easy. But having all these little groups all over the place and all at each other's throats, that is not a ruling ideology. We will see. But I don't think you understand what Leonard's talking about. And I don't think you understand what unification means. All right. Ali's birthday. It's Ali's birthday today. Do you guys know it's Ali's birthday? I'm not going to ask how old she is. That's impolite. But it is Ali's birthday. Ali is responsible for raising $400 every one of these shows. You certainly don't want to disappoint Ali on her birthday. So please help Ali reach her goal on her birthday. And, for her birthday, we shouldn't be doing $400. For her birthday, we should be easily at $1,000. So if anybody wants to jump in and wish Ali a happy birthday with a big fat, super chat question, that would be very, very, very cool. So because Ali's 21. Oh God, she's young. Ali's 21, so she just turned 21. That's a big birthday. In the U.S., it means you can now drink. Let's see. She's leaving to go have pizza and cake with her family. So go have fun, Ali. Hopefully the guys here won't disappoint in terms of the super chat questions while you're celebrating. All right. So where were we? Yeah. So a big change happened in corporations when corporations decided that they are no longer responsible for maximizing shareholder wealth. They're now responsible for stakeholders. And then on top of that, the change was when big institutional investors shifted to stakeholder capitalism. Bye, Ali. Happy birthday. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Now, some of that shift with investors happened because the largest investors in the United States, with the exception of BlackRock, pension plans. And pension plans are political entities, particularly the public pension plans. So CalPERS, CalSTRS, these are political entities. CalPERS is the Teachers Union's pension plan of California. Massive. But it's basically a political entity. It's not there to maximize returns for the pensioners, because their money is guaranteed by taxpayers. They're committed. Taxpayers are committed to filling in any deficits that the pension has. So they can afford to play games on these boards of directors. They can afford to vote for all kinds of weird things, including to vote for the destruction of American business. So of all the phenomena out there that worries me, it's not woke employees. It's not the white fragility seminars that people have to go to. Nobody takes those seriously. It's not, these woke spokesmen and all of that. I'm much more terrified by the shift in American business and the shift among American investors to put pressure on these companies to abandon maximizing shareholder wealth and take on all kinds of social responsibility goals. And that just opens the door up for the loudest pressure group, for the loudest woke group, for the loudest destructive group to have influence on the corporation. They couldn't have had it in the past because the business would say, the CEO would say, we're here to maximize shareholder wealth. Great cause, we're not interested. That's gone because they've abandoned their primary purpose, their primary goal. Now, there is some good news, and I think there's going to be a lot of good news on the woke front in the years to come. I don't think American people are particularly interested in woke culture. I don't think American people are particularly left in these regards. They might. I think they're more left. They're left on some things, but I don't think in the cultural issues they're that left. Thanks, Jonathan. Really appreciate it. The American people are going to reject a lot of the cultural wokeism. And you can see it now in Silicon Valley. So over the last year, over the last few months really, a handful of founders and CEOs, Brian Armstrong of Coinbase, Jason Fried of Basecamp, Shopify's Tobias Lütke, and Medium's Ev Williams have all declared that they're not interested in social justice activism. They do not want it to happen on the company time, on company websites, on company chats. That the business is there to make money. It's there to do business. And all these other issues, employees can do in their own private times. That is huge. This got a lot of press. Of course, people like the New York Times flipped out completely and immediately accused all these companies for having racist employment practices and treating employees badly and all of this stuff. But in the Valley, these companies have gained a lot of respect, particularly among venture capitalists, founders, and among many employees. No, thank you for keeping track. Look, we're at $115 an hour in. That must be the lowest amount we've ever done, maybe. So come on, guys. You can do a lot better than $115 in an hour. And remember, it's Ali's birthday, so we should at least get to $400. So step up. Step up. I know a few of you can afford to do it. Do it. So a number of companies have now banned all these woke threads and all this. It's a Saturday you're on. Yeah, this is a good place to spend your money on a Saturday. To spend money on. In October, an anonymous group inspired by Coinbase's Brian Armstrong came together under the banner Mission Protocol. And I encourage you to go and find this. It's you can look at missionprotocol.org, missionprotocol.org. They have a website. And the idea of Mission Protocol is get businesses to focus on what business is supposed to focus on. Work, production, creation. With the idea that, and they explicitly say this, to actually create values, to actually make money. Actually make money. You have to focus. You have to make an effort. You have to really invest. And that all this stuff is just a distraction. All this stuff takes away from the ability of a company to focus on what it's supposed to focus on, which is profitability, which is value creation, which is product creation. So we're seeing startups from all over Silicon Valley jumping into the Mission Protocol threads that are going on in different social media platforms and giving it a thumbs up. Paul Graham, who's a famed venture capitalist, has tweeted about this, tweeted his support to 1.3 million followers on Twitter. You guys should follow Paul Graham on Twitter. He's excellent. Some founders and venture capitalists are refusing to talk to. By the way, this is out of an article in Quillette by an author by the name of Peter Savadnik. It's called Silicon Valley's Mission Protocol. Mission Protocol revolution is beginning to attain critical mass. I mean, that's inspiring that this is beginning to get critical mass. Right? They're refusing to speak to to the New York Times, to the Washington Post, the regular media. Instead, to the extent that they're communicating, they're using Clubhouse and Substack. You've got a number of influencers using Substack now to go and write regularly about what's going on in Silicon Valley. I follow some of them. I encourage you to. The whole blockchain world, the blockchain and crypto world, is very, very much rejects these woke ideas. I think Coinbase is not an exception. It's more like the rule. And you're seeing more and more writers and podcasters coming out against the whole woke culture. There really is a backlash. Even Commentary Magazine, I saw this week, had a story about the backlash against woke. Woke is an anti-concept. It stands for nothing. It stands for it's a stand-in for, it's a mushy, vague. I don't think it's an anti-concept in the sense of, I don't think it's trying to annihilate something legitimate. I think it's just a non-concept. I think it doesn't really mean anything. It's a stand-in for a bunch of vague abstractions that are not clear what they are. It represents an attitude around leftist ideology and the whining and complaining and the canceling that it generates, right? So Snowflake, and Snowflake is a company. The woke voices are still out there. So, for example, Snowflake CEO went on Bloomberg Television, and he endorsed kind of a moderate approach to diversity, where you don't override merit, and you don't reflect the climate of what he called hysteria and outrage. This is a quote from him. From my own experience talking to many CEOs, all the names that you know, privately we have the same mind, right? We don't want to, ultimately we want to go by merit. And we'd like to see diversity, but the key is merit. he got lambasted. He got lambasted by people within the company and outside the company, and he was forced to offer an apology. So the woke culture is still there, but there are more and more voices like his, and more brave voices, not like he's not that brave, that are demanding and insisting that this stuff stop. Founders don't have the patience, don't have the time to deal with this nonsense. But the fact is that, as this article points out, the shift, quoting from the article, the shift towards stakeholder-centric capitalism has opened the floodgates to all the species of wokery in the workplace, prompting founders and CEOs to call for a return to business qua business. I'll be debating John Mackey again on this issue of stakeholder-centric supposed capitalism. I'll be debating that again in next month at Freedom Fest. But this is the kind of bullshit that it opens up to. This is what entrepreneurs want. Building products that other people will buy requires not only hard work, talent, and the spirit of innovation, but also monomaniacal focus. I think this guy's read Ayn Rand. As the mission protocol site bluntly states, quote, mission focus is required to achieve difficult goals. It's hard to build something sustainable and truly excellent if the project is frequently distracted by issues or events peripheral to the mission. That's why they chose the name Mission Focus. Focus on building products. Focus on creating values. So there are people, better people, fighting against this. Focus, focus, focus. Yeah, I'm not surprised Brian Armstrong is a fan of Ayn Rand. That's good to know. And he says Ev Williams is also. So it's interesting, though, one of the points he makes in the article. He says many of the owners, and this is to you guys who are anti-immigration. He says, and many of the owners who are most inclined to speak their mind against woke culture are foreign-born figures. They didn't come to America to please reporters at the New York Times or get corrected on their pronoun usage by people half their age. They came to America to build the future and to make money in the process. Yes. One of the examples he gives is a company called Cloud Kitchen, which is a novel food delivery startup. Quote, all Cloud Kitchen's guys are immigrants or Midwest guys. They're totally inoculated from the wokeness, and their leadership is completely anti-woke, very visibly so. They just don't care. They only care about one thing. I think that's the future. So, reading all this and going over the Mission Protocol website was inspiring. And, left me with a sense that there's definitely hope. Left me with a sense that there are definitely people out there fighting this. That even Silicon Valley, which seems to be so often at the center of all culture, is fighting this, is objecting to this. It's particularly true of small, innovative companies. It's particularly true of companies run by founders. It's more difficult at large companies that don't have cohesive cultures, where the founder's not involved, where they have bought into this stakeholder theory. But there is a generation of founders that are fighting, that are creating the future, that are building the future you and I will enjoy, that are fighting this whole wokeness, this far leftist nonsense. And I think they're going to win. I think they're going to win. So, the hysteria, the panic, too soon to panic. It's way too soon to panic. And the panic only serves the purposes of the statists. The panic only plays into the hands of the worst elements on the right. So Google is much more likely to be woke than a startup. But even at Google, how deep does it go? Again, it's a vocal minority. It's a vocal minority, and to the extent that we can engage, or somebody can engage the majority, it can make a huge difference. Panic is weakness, absolutely. And panic is weakness that opens you up to supporting the worst elements out there that supposedly are fighting your enemies, but in the end are just as bad as your enemies. All right, let's do some Super Chat questions. Again, we are way short of our usual Super Chat numbers, and I don't see a lot of questions, so it's in your hands, guys. All right, on Marxism, Nazism, fascism, types of socialism, but with a different focus, nation, race, proletarian. Hitler's and Mussolini's economics were in the majority of cases very similar to USSR. Is there something there? Yes, I mean, there's no accident that Nazism was called National Socialism. But I think I prefer to think of them all as types of statism, where the state rules, the state has the authority over your life. And that takes different forms, different manifestations. A socialist manifestation or a communist manifestation is where all the means of production are owned by the state. The state runs the factories. The workers own the factories, supposedly. They don't really own anything. Nobody owns anything. The state owns everything. And that's one particular manifestation of statism. Now, you could say that's a manifestation of socialism. And I'm not going to argue with that, but I just think it's not as useful. I think statism is the broadest category. Then you have communism. Socialism is typically where the state owns some of the means of production. Workers own some of the means of production. But there's still some semblance of freedom and there's some private property. It's more like what people call today democratic socialism, right? Israel was a socialist country when I was growing up. And the labor union was the largest employer in the country. The largest employer in the country was the labor union. That's socialism. It wasn't communism because it wasn't authoritarian, it wasn't dictatorial, and the state didn't own everything. But it was certainly socialist. Nazism, or let's take fascism first, because Nazism is a form of fascism. Fascism is, again, a form of statism. The founder of fascism was Mussolini, and Mussolini was a socialist. And he came to the conclusion that socialism would never catch on in Italy, that socialism would never gain power in Italy. As popular as it was on and off, it was not attainable. And he cared about the working class, and he appealed to the working class, and the working class are the people who voted him in. The working class are typically the ones who vote in the fascists. And he ultimately became an opponent of socialists and communists as ineffectual and incompetent. But he, again, was a minority. He won a very small percentage of the vote, but was a compromise figure to be the prime minister. And when he became prime minister, he basically slowly took everything over, and there were no elections after that, and he became a dictator. But under fascism, the state controls the means of production, but does not own them. And fascism elevates the state and the country and the people as a collective above everything else. So it's okay to sacrifice the individual to the state. It's okay to sacrifice the individual to the Italian people. And it's all about the state. Okay. Nazism is a form of fascism where you elevate not the state per se, although the state is the mechanism by which it's done, but we elevate the race or the ethnic group above all else. So it's okay to sacrifice the individual, it's okay to sacrifice other groups for the sake of the superior race, the Aryan race in the case of Nazism, right? But that's just a form of fascism. The state is the mechanism by which all of that is done. And Nazism, like fascism, controls the means of production. It doesn't own them. So you could call it a form of socialism, but again, I think it's more useful to call it a form of statism. Now, Marxism is the ideology, the philosophy, the theory that animates socialism and communism, and certainly influenced fascism and Nazism. But, and by the way, often the fight against Marxism, the obsessive fight against Marxism has typically led to fascism. Most fascists arise in an attempt to destroy, to label everybody they oppose a Marxist and to destroy them. And this is the danger, panicking and landing up with fascism instead of socialism or communism. So I prefer to think of them all as statists, ideologies, and then different types, different forms of which statism takes. And if you look at China today, China's statist, China's authoritarian, but China's not exactly communist. It's far from communism. It's not socialism. It's maybe a kind of fascism, but not really. It's a different form of statism. So it's not like Nazism, fascism, communism, socialism. We've covered all the forms of statism. For example, the mixed economy is a form of statism. We live under statism. It's just a more palatable form of statism. And China's a different form of statism. All right, I see no more $20 questions. So plenty of time for a bunch of $20 questions, plenty of time for $100 contributions to the Yaron Brook Show. I don't know, you guys gave so much in the first half of the year. Where is our best friend Hank? He's been silent today. On the chat, yeah, but no dollars associated with it. No dollars associated with it. All right. Charlie keeps pitching in with some questions. Doesn't socialism predate Marxism? Yes, socialism predates Marxism, but does the term predate Marxism? Yeah, I mean, you could think. I mean, there's a sense in which communes certainly predated Marxism. But Marxism is an ideology to justify and explain socialism and communism, and all modern applications of socialism and communism were based on Marx. And again, this is why I think to label everybody you don't agree with as a Marxist is lazy and inaccurate and not very enlightening. Right? So Marx is one theory, but there are lots of theories of collectivism. There are lots of theories of statism. Why do you think that starting a question with what is obviously for you an insult is a good thing? Right? Some of you, evil black cat. What's the point? You're trying to troll me. You're trying. What is the point? Have you considered starting a Discord server so people here can socialize with each other? You start a Discord server for all the people here. Why do I need to start a Discord server? I've got this. I've got Twitter. I've got Facebook. Why does, you guys do your thing. I mean, but I've been on Discord. I did the Vosh thing on Discord. It's not fun ribbing. It's hey boomer. It's disrespectful with no purpose assigned to it. Sorry. But Discord servers, I don't get Discord, but why not start a Yaron Brook Show Discord server? And all of you guys can go over there and chat about the show, right? All right, I'm disappointed. You didn't respond to how all major companies' DEI departments being identical does not imply unification, because to unify is to bring everybody together with a common set of values. Yes, all HR departments, these are all people trained in the same place. They're all trained with the same ideology. They all use the same courses. They all do the same thing. All right, so all HR departments in the country are unified. That isn't unification, not on any grand scale, because nobody takes HR departments seriously. Everybody, and I've been to these seminars, right? Everybody's there because they have to be there. They're there because they were told to be there. They want to know what's legal and what's not legal so they can get out of the room quickly as possible. But HR departments did not unify business. They don't unify corporations. What's destroying corporations, what's destroying America, or what will lead to a new ideology in America is not HR departments. It's the backlash against HR departments. It's a backlash against the disintegrated philosophy that they are preaching, that they are teaching, that they are advocating for. That's what scares me. What scares me is that the M2s will be anti-Marxists, and they'll be anti-woke, and they'll be anti the HR departments. In the name of what? Not in the name of freedom. Not in the name of freedom. How do you feel about the aesthetic future of America? Do you think there are trends heading in the right direction in regards to art, film, literature? Brian, thank you. Really appreciate that. That's great. Brian's brought us much closer to the $400 goal. So, step up, people. Brian did. So with regard to the aesthetic future of America, so I'm mixed. I'd say over the last 20 to 30 years, there's definitely been an improvement in some areas. I think after a long time of almost no good sculpture painting, there's a bit of a return to good sculpture, good painting. You go out there and you go to galleries and stuff, and the stuff is better than just Kandinsky splash paint on canvas. Now, I was more optimistic 10, 15 years ago. I think there's been a slide a bit away from that. But it's definitely better than 40, 50 years ago when Pollock and Kandinsky ruled everything, right? Rule everything. So, I'm somewhat positive there. I think the art of film is getting better, particularly on TV. I think the ability to make aesthetically good, if you will, TV shows has improved dramatically. I think they still struggle with theme, with topic, right? And so, yeah, I think television has improved significantly over the last few years, over the last, 40, 50 years, in terms of its quality, production quality. But the themes are still problematic, right? The themes are still problematic. But even there, I see glimpses of hope. Even on the movies, once in a while, I see glimpses of hope in terms of better movies. It's not yet a movement, but I do think there is there are better people out there. There are better production values. So I'm not pessimistic about the future, the aesthetic future of America. The main problem is that Americans don't have strong aesthetic values. They don't value aesthetic that much. And I think that's a huge challenge. But I do think at the level of producing art, there are better people, and they produce, and there's the potential for good things. And we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. I think that art sometimes gets better before the culture does. It helps shape the culture in a better direction. Think about the Renaissance. In a sense, the art was ahead of its time during that period. Why isn't a portion of Silicon Valley objectivist by now? Your guess is as good as mine, because the people, they don't take ideas seriously. Many of them have read Ayn Rand. Many are fans. There's a sense in which the early generation of Silicon Valley was more friendly towards Rand than this generation. But as somebody was saying earlier in the chat, a number of CEOs of Silicon Valley are big Ayn Rand fans. And we'll see what happens with the next generation of startups. But certainly the generation of Steve Jobs and Michael Dell and Don Valentine and Larry Ellison and Sam McNeely, that generation was very influenced by Rand. And I think many CEOs are, many founders are, but they're afraid to be public about it. I wish they weren't. I wish they were more vocal, and I wish we had more influence in Silicon Valley. How to do it? If somebody has a good idea, let me know, because I've tried everything I know how to try, with some success, but not as much as I would like. All right, let's see. Okay, a $20 question. Hi, Yaron. I listened to the show with Amy. I was surprised she said that we are at the mercy of tech. It surprised me from her. A lot of my friends believe this too. I argue against it. Why is this view so pervasive today? I mean, I think for her, I don't want to speak for her, but certainly her involvement in Parler has changed her perspective. Parler certainly was at the mercy of certain tech companies that hurt it significantly. I think she believes that the government is far more involved in what tech is doing than I think they are, and she's much more eager to blame tech for it. I was surprised she was that adamant. In particular, given the COVID, I was surprised that she thought tech was advocating for lockdowns. I found that surprising. Or that we're at their mercy during lockdowns, when I think they saved us. I view it the flip side, that they actually saved us during lockdowns. So I'm thankful for their existence during lockdowns. What would life have been without them during the lockdowns? So yeah, you'd have to ask Amy. Oops, what did I do here? I deleted. Whoops, looks like I deleted a bunch of Super Chat questions. Let me go backwards and try to catch them. I'm more concerned about business taking social media feedback more seriously than their bottom line. The comment saying being go woke or go broke. I think that's right. Again, that is the whole idea of social responsibility. It's the whole idea of stakeholders. It's a business is focused on the bottom line. If a business is focused on maximizing shareholder wealth, doesn't care about social media. It is focused on making money. It's focused on producing and creating and building and making. And the focus now on stakeholders is distracting and makes suddenly unimportant people seem important. Social media, for example. If the Treasury and the Fed insist on America having a debased dollar, will they have an inevitable influence on American and global business? Is Congress the root of it, the culture, or all of it? Well, the root of it is philosophy. The root of it is the ideas. The root is The root of it are the ideas that manifest itself in the culture, and then the culture manifests itself in Congress. We elect our politicians, we elect people, and we have accepted and have completely accepted, capitulated to the fact that the Fed and the Treasury should have this power, should have this ability. So it flows from philosophy, ideas more broadly, intellectuals, to culture, to politics, and then politics manifests itself in things like the Fed and the Treasury debasing the dollar. And yes, it has influence globally. It has influence on, and of course it's a feedback mechanism, because having that kind of politics, having a dollar debased, impacts the culture, which then, appoints which then votes for politicians, and it's just one of these loops that gets worse and worse and worse. All right. All right, I see I've managed to catch these, the ones that I thought were deleted. Okay, have you been to Switzerland? And what are your thoughts on living in Zurich? Besides London, what places do you think will remain as centers of finance? Since a lot of work is remote now, how will that impact finance culture? It's going to be interesting to see how much of finance stays remote and how much of finance returns to the offices. London obviously is a big center, and it'll be interesting to see whether in London we have we have people returning to the offices or allowed to work remotely. Zurich is a beautiful place. It's a beautiful city. It's in a valley between the mountains. It's super close to skiing. It's super close to some of the most beautiful scenery on the planet Earth. Switzerland is a gorgeous country. It's relatively free. Taxes around Zurich are pretty low, so you can live pretty well in that area. And so it's definitely a center of finance, although less so than in the past. And it's definitely a great place to live. I think the Eurozone will probably develop a finance center. It'll probably be in Germany, maybe Frankfurt. There will be a Eurozone, if you will, finance hub. London served that role, but since now with Brexit, it's more difficult for firms in London to do business in Europe proper. So I do think you'll see another finance hub rising up in Europe. It would be great if it was somewhere like Copenhagen, which is a great city to live in, but it'll probably be somewhere in Germany. And then finally, of course, with Hong Kong's, I think, growing demise, as the Chinese clamp down on it and slowly destroy what makes Hong Kong Hong Kong and what makes Hong Kong unique, I think Singapore is poised to do better and better as a financial center. So I think Singapore will replace Hong Kong as the financial hub of Asia. And I think Hong Kong is now set for a slow decline. I think even within China, I think places like Guangzhou and certainly Shanghai are going to slowly outpace Hong Kong in terms of vibrancy, in terms of energy, and in terms of Hong Kong is losing what Hong Kong makes Hong Kong Hong Kong, which is freedom. And therefore, if it's going to be like any other city in China, why go all the way to Hong Kong? So it's going to be really interesting to watch. Interesting, tragic, sad, depressing to watch the slow demise of Hong Kong. But I do think that a place like Singapore, which has limited freedom, a lot of economic freedom, but limited freedom otherwise, is a great place to live. It's clean, it's safe. It's a lot going on, and great infrastructure, and a real finance center. So I definitely consider Singapore. Americans are very house-proud, tasteful design, great American value worth acknowledging. Frank, we're going to disagree on this one. Americans are very house-proud. That is true. I don't find them tasteful at all in their design. They tend to be second-handed, boring. Every house looks the same. The design of every house inside looks the same. Same furniture, same art, if you can call it that, same decor. It's rare to see originality. It's rare to see something interesting. It's rare to see something beautiful. I think Americans have a very, very dull, boring aesthetic value when it comes to their home. And you can see that, and I've talked about this many times on the show, you can see that in the boring architecture. Tuscan homes in California, this dumbest idea ever. In California we have air conditioning. You don't need little windows. You need big windows so you can see the view. You need in and out spaces. California has no bugs. So why wouldn't you open it up and allow for flow of in and out spaces? Instead, you have these little courtyards and these little rooms. And I find Americans way too formal. There's a room that is the dining room, and there's a room that is the living room, and there's a room that is the family room, and each one has a code of how to design it and how to put what kind of furniture to put in it. I am very unimpressed. I'll tell you, I was in South America. I was in some homes in South America, in Brazil, in Argentina, and the Latin Americans have so much better taste than Americans when it comes to modern architecture of homes, when it comes to design, when it comes to furniture, when it comes to layout of homes, when it comes to just being original and original in a good way, not original for the sake of being original. I find that. Yeah, I find Americans are mostly dull when it comes to the aesthetics of the home. Usonian home, which was the homes of Frank Lloyd Wright, beautiful homes, in and out. Everything was, just a conceptual view of how to use a house, and you don't see that. You don't see that in architecture in America, almost at all. Original cost dollars, but you can go to IKEA and get some pretty cool stuff, pretty cheap. You can go to some. I've seen some Scandinavian design places in California, even here in Puerto Rico. You can get furniture that looks very modern and slick, that's made in China, that is based on European design. That is quite modern and original and cool and nice. And yeah, maybe it's a little bit more expensive, but yeah. But my point is that if you're proud of your house, if you want to live in a beautiful surrounding, if you want to do all that, then you should invest in it. And investing in stuff that's important to you is not cheap. It's not cheap, right? IKEA, I don't care if IKEA's woke. I like the furniture generally. I mean, if you're going cheap, Europeans, the Scandinavians and the Italians make the aesthetically the best furniture in the world. They're copied by the Chinese, so you can get Chinese copies for really cheap. I'm not arguing for literal copies, but the style is copied by the Chinese, and they make it a lot cheaper than the Italians or the Scandinavians. So you can design a nice house cheaply, and you can build a nice modern house that doesn't have to be super expensive. But yeah, I know. My point was with regard to Frank's point about how tasteful their design is. I just don't find it very tasteful. I don't find it very tasteful. Okay. No, I don't want to make my own furniture. That would be ridiculous. I am a huge believer in division of labor. I am happy to pay money for other people to make furniture for me. And for me to have a selection of things that I can look at, so I don't have to imagine what furniture should be like, that I can look at different things. I don't want to make my car. I don't want to make my furniture. I don't want to build my home. I don't want to paint my walls. I don't want to build my microphone or design or code Zoom. I want other people to do that. I'll do my thing, the thing that I have a comparative advantage is, make money and spread it around by spending it on all those other people who do all that other good stuff. Nilufar. All right. Can you explain shareholder versus stakeholder? I mean, it's going to take a long time, but just quickly, I will explain it. A corporation, legally, is owned by its shareholders. The shareholders have, in a sense, they own the assets. And certainly they own the residual asset. They own what's left over once you take the liabilities out and what's left of the assets. They're the owners of the company. Here in Puerto Rico, I have a corporation. I am the owner of the corporation. I happen to own it 100%, but in a public corporation, what we call a public corporation, there are lots of shareholders. But as a group, they own the company. And if you own 1%, you own 1% of the company. That's what it means. And you get a vote on who the CEO will be or who the directors will be, who then elect the CEO. You can fire the directors. You can fire the CEO. You are the owner. And legally, and I think logically, the purpose of a business is to do the bidding of the owner. Now, because ownership is diffused, we don't survey you about, well, what do you feel like us doing today? The mandate that the owners give the managers in a publicly traded corporation is make us money. Make us money. Legally, within the bounds of ethics, and within the field that you're an expert in, make us money. And the way to make money is to maximize shareholder wealth. So the theory is, the theory has been that corporations, the purpose of a business, the purpose of a corporation is to maximize long-term shareholder wealth. Stakeholder theory says, no. There are many people who have an interest, a perspective, an involvement with the company. Why should we only benefit shareholders? What about suppliers? What about bondholders? What about customers? What about employees? What about the community? What about the planet, the environment? What about all those things? And the argument there is we should try to balance all those. We should try to balance all those and not favor shareholders. Now, I do a whole thing where if you maximize shareholder wealth, you treat customers well because otherwise they won't buy your stuff. You treat suppliers well, otherwise they won't provide you with the materials. You treat your employees well because otherwise they won't be productive, and on and on and on, right? But yeah, government is also a stakeholder, absolutely. But all from the context and framework of maximizing shareholder wealth. Stakeholders is a kind of utilitarian theory where you're trying to maximize some kind of utility function. And it's impossible to do. It's unproductive. It diverts your focus. It's everything I've talked about today in terms of distraction and taking you away from making stuff, creating values to be sold in the marketplace for a profit. Okay. So I reject the idea of stakeholders as the purpose of business. The purpose of business is to make money for shareholders. All right, best friend Hank, where have you been all night? But he writes to the rescue at the end to bring us to $399.99. 1 cent short. Thank you, Hank. Really appreciate it. Appreciate the support. Alejandrina must be happy now. Right. Are there any parks, roads, libraries, or squares in America dedicated to Ayn Rand? Would you sanction if there was? There's some roads. There's some John Galt roads. I think there might be an Atlas Shrugged. There might even be an Ayn Rand road. There are, I don't think any libraries or squares or parks. There's a sculpture, I think a couple of sculptures in the U.S. I wish that anything that would get her name more visibility I remember that when I spoke for the first time in St. Petersburg, the guy in Russia, the guy who introduced me, one of the things he said was that, Brian, thank you. Wow, now we're at 4:50. This is great. I really appreciate it. He's got a question, but it didn't. Okay, let me just copy the question over. What was I saying? Anyway, I can't remember. Thank you, Noel. Have you seen Itaewon Class on Netflix? It's a South Korean drama. I would describe it as a cross between the Count of Monte Cristo and the Fountainhead, set in the Korean restaurant industry. No, I have not. I will check it out. I'm looking for Korean dramas. I really enjoy the Korean dramas I've seen, but no, thank you, Brian. Really appreciate that. Why are some leftists invested in Chinese lab leak of COVID being false? I think they were primarily invested in it last year when Trump and other people were making a big deal out of it. So I think they were invested in it because they were trying to be anti-Trump and nothing else. I don't know that they're still invested in it. I see a lot of mainstream media backtracking and doing soul searching and highlighting the Chinese lab leak theory now. It's become mainstream within the left, at least that I'm seeing. I'm seeing a lot of stories in leftist publications or mainstream publications about it, and a lot of mea culpas, a lot of how did we screw this up? How did we get this wrong? What happened? Some people are going to, because they called it a conspiracy theory a year ago, they're just not willing to admit they're wrong, right? So they're just going to hunker down and just deny because they don't want to admit they were wrong. That would be my explanation at this point. And it's still not a proven theory. It seems more and more likely the more and more evidence comes out, but it's still not proven one way or the other. If USA became socialist, what would happen to its nuclear arsenal? Also, if USA is attacked, would we strike back, or would people say that we deserved it? If USA became socialist, then the nuclear arsenal would be under socialist government. I mean, it would just be Bernie Sanders would control the nuclear arsenal, just like Biden and Trump did before him. If, Bernie Sanders lookalike, whoever the socialist was. I don't know that socialism, this is again the confusion. Socialism doesn't mean foreign policy weakness. Israel was a socialist country. When it defeated the Egyptian army in 1956, when it defeated the combined 7 armies of the Arab world in the Six-Day War, it defeated the Egyptian Assyrian armies in 1973. All of that was when Israel was a socialist country. I grew up in Israel being socialist. So, what do you mean by socialist, right? This idea that we deserve it, this idea that we're bad, it's not a socialist idea. It's certainly associated with the left, but it doesn't come from a socialist place. It comes from a nihilist place. It comes from the hatred of the good for being the good, a hatred of America for being America. I mean, I know libertarians who would think that if America was attacked, we deserve it. They're not socialists, they're libertarians, but they hate America for a variety of reasons. So hatred of America is not necessarily socialist. Socialists can love their country. Israelis were super patriotic and yet super socialist all the way till the 1977. The Labour Party won every single election for the founding of Israel in 1948 till 1977. So for 30 years. So don't confuse, again, if you label everything as socialist, everything you hate as socialist, then it confuses your thinking. It doesn't help you actually think clearly about what the issues are and who the enemy really is. Do you give any credence to people who think Joe Biden has cognitive issues? Early it seems far-fetched, but now it's getting really uncomfortable seeing him speak in public. Does he have cognitive lapses? Yeah, I think so. You know, when I know few people who reach that age who don't have some. How bad is it? I don't know. You'd have to give him a cognitive test, or you'd have to know him more personally. He seemed to do fine in Europe. He seems to do okay in some of his press conferences. But remember, Joe Biden used to be weird 30 years ago. He used to do these press conferences and he used to give these bizarre answers. So Biden has always had a weird, you know, he has these mental lapses. 30 years ago he had it. So I don't know, and I don't know that he's any worse than Ronald Reagan in his second term, who was clearly starting to suffer from dementia. So, but we'll see. We'll see how bad it gets. He seemed to do fine with like Putin. Right? I mean, I don't know if you saw the pictures of him and Putin sitting. The body language was striking. I mean, Putin looked like he'd just been beaten up by the school bully. He looked, you know, the opposite of how he looked with Trump. When he was with Trump, he looked like he was the bully. Here, he looked like he was beaten up by a bully. So I don't know what Joe Biden did to him, but I have to say I've never seen Putin look so demoralized as he looked after his meeting with Biden. I don't think he projected weakness with Russia. I mean, Trump projected weakness with Russia and projected weakness with North Korea. I think Biden did fine with Russia. I think Biden projects, I don't know, wishy-washiness internally, but I think from at least Russia's perspective, I thought he projected strengths. I was positively impressed by him in dealing with Putin. Yeah, he looked tired. He took off his jacket to do the press conference. I like that he was casual enough to take off his jacket to do the press conference. But look, Biden's Biden. He's not the smartest guy in the world. He doesn't really believe in anything. He's kind of a, you know, your old uncle kind of thing. Trump armed Ukraine a little bit. Nothing radical. Nothing, not a lot. Trump basically spent most of his term, you know, appeasing the Russians. There were some sanctions here and there, nothing serious. And he projected huge weakness towards the Russians. Huge. What, the fact that Trump walked across the DMV to North Korea? There's nothing. But then he also hugged and he waved a communist flag, and you know, the guy's a complete moron. That didn't project strength when he took a little a communist flag, you know, was it in Singapore, and waved it. Yeah, he has the balls of a moron. But when it comes to anything a little sophisticated, he projected ultimate weakness. You think that calling the brutal dictator of North Korea a buddy, a friend, is not projecting weakness? There's nothing that projects weakness more than that. Sorry, I mean, all right, everybody. I really don't want to talk about Trump. I was talking about Ayn Rand in St. Petersburg. Thank you, Wanda Freeman. That's what I forgot. See, even I have cognitive lapses. So this guy was introducing me, and I was going to speak, and one of the things he said was that he really hopes one day he thinks it's a travesty that St. Petersburg does not yet have a boulevard named after Ayn Rand and a square and a park named after her. That the day will come well, she will be remembered as St. Petersburg as one of the giants that came out of that city, and be celebrated in St. Petersburg for that. All right. All right, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for getting us to 480 tonight. That'll make Alejandrina happy. Happy birthday, Alejandrina. I will be back tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Not sure about the topic yet. I'll figure it out tomorrow. But I'll see you all tomorrow, 8 p.m., same place, same time. Have a great rest of your weekend. And bye, everybody.